permit, but I just think that this is something that would be very beneficial and boater-friendly for everybody that comes to our city that wants to boat in our city and use our facilities.
Patty, do you have a second to come to the podium?
Patty Allen, General Manager, Fisherman's Village.
Do you have day docks?
We do.
Do you
We
have
do.
rules on your day
No
docks?
rules.
Okay,
Other than no overnight, and that's with her submerged land lease.
okay.
So people can come, park,
You have a harbor
eat,
master there
dine.
that's watching over.
Yes, and then
okay.
security in the evenings, but no overnight. And surprisingly, we have very, very few people parking overnight. We do have a dinghy dock within the basin that people can use if they want to come in, use our showers. There is a fee, and I'm not quite sure how much that is, but if they want to use the showers in the pool, I'm not sure about those people parking. I just wrote a note to ask my harbor master because parking, I'm not sure of that. So,
Hope I didn't get anybody in trouble by
no,
that, but that's what I was told.
that's okay.
So if somebody wanted to come in for the day, there is a dinghy dock available, and the day docks are there, but there is no overnight.
Correct.
But you have management, so you have a harbor master, and you have somebody watching over what's the activity that's going on there.
What we see on our, what we call courtesy dock, and that's on the entire west side behind Scotty's, all in front of Harpoon Harry's, and then a little bit on the east side that they can park. And what we see is people coming in for the day to have lunch and dinner, and it's primarily during the day rather than the evening. They come in and then they turn around and somebody else comes in. And there's occasions when it's completely full, especially in season, it'll be completely full. And then sometimes they raft up or wait and then come back in.
Thank you.
I see on this note, I think we can't fail to remember this is a day dock, not a marina. One, in terms of the one in Gilchrist, but two, I don't see why we can't just have an ordinance, have these rules stand, but have it so the officer has discretion in terms of just dealing with people in their life conditions. I don't see why we need to do anything other than have our rules.
Discretion is a very bad word from a city attorney perspective. So let me throw this out for consideration.
This is,
I understand, this is with respect to Gilchrist.
okay.
And I understand that there seems to be a consensus that the regulations that are in paragraph B in the ordinance relating to day docks are reasonable and would be applicable to Gilchrist, but for the overnight docking situation. So how about if we modify the first numbered line to say, except for those vessels for which a city permit has been issued, overnight docking is prohibited between the hours of 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. Then we add a new paragraph C, which says, city may issue permits on a first-come, first-served basis for vessels that require docking for extended periods of time.
Then what if we made a limit to 20?
Well, and that's the next consideration. It doesn't need to be in this ordinance. You can decide how many permits you want to be issuing on a first-come, first-served basis.
Okay. Patty?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I would definitely, if you do go with the permit, limit it to 10 maximum. Because you always want to leave it availability for the casual day.
So that doesn't need to be provided for in this ordinance. We can administratively determine how many permits are issued.
Okay.
And then, if we, first come, first serve, I think is the best way
Along
to
the
do it.
lines of what Gary was saying too, is we had one portion day dock only, another portion permit area. Wouldn't that kind of take care of, so I don't, one, half of it, something, permit,
Mayor
people?
Kiesling, it would actually, looking at the picture up there, you could have the interior of the floating dock designated for the permitted area, and that would easily be identified with the sign. We would just have to correct the loading sign. You have the outside area for loading and unloading. you'll have a full dock for any casual dinghies that's coming in, you know.
That I could live with. Patty wanted to say one more thing, so she got back up. Go ahead.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yesterday, you had 11 boats out there. 2 weeks ago, you had 21 boats out there, because I count them usually every day. And I believe that a few of them are coming into the village to have permanent residency in our marina, or long-term residency in our marina. And I think the reason why you have a lot of boats out there was no slips for people to come in, and now that season is coming to an end, that there are slips. One of the things, and I know we've talked about this before in previous meetings, and I think there was an issue in, Mr. Levin can correct me, in Sarasota, where you had derelict boats out there. My fear would be that we would get a lot of boats in our basin or out without a mooring field. So I think we need to start looking into our future. And I know Councilwoman Matthews is looking at a master plan for our harbor, but I think we need to start considering that avenue as well, because we want people to come in and enjoy our community. But not everything needs to be free. We need to continue to support our economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy?
So a question for David. Then what about the fee that we charge for the permit? Is that something we can determine to be administrative and not in an ordinance, or do we put that in the ordinance?
Well, here's, if we're going to go in that direction, we can, and since we're working on this ordinance, we can, in this ordinance, provide that the mechanism for, this wouldn't be the language, but the mechanism for issuing the permits, including the fee and the number and all that, would be provided for by resolution of the city council.
Okay.
So that we can then
That's a much
develop
easier
those,
process.
yes, and it's
Okay.
easier to amend. And, look, and if the simple suggestion that I've provided for here doesn't work, we can always amend the ordinance again to correct whatever issues are brought up at that time. I mean, we are lucky here in Punta Gorda that we don't have the evils yet that Sarasota, for example, experienced. And that's why Sarasota ultimately had to go to a highly regulated mooring field that at the time the state legislature, granted, and so that you can actually require people to moor within that mooring field, and anybody that wasn't mooring in that mooring field was somehow in violation of the law. I mean, we're lucky that we have a limited number of liveaboards with dinghies, and that currently we can accommodate those dinghies at the Gilchrist docks. But if it gets to the point where we have many more boats living aboard and not enough space at the docks, we're going to find dinghies all along our shoreline, and we'll have to deal with that at the time that develops.
So in the resolution, could we restrict the permit parking to the interior of the day dock? Would that be part of the resolution as well?
I think I'd rather see that as the ordinance, particularly from an enforcement perspective.
Okay.
Okay. So you're getting the information you need for the ordinance?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a public hearing too, so just procedurally, since it is Parliamentary
Yeah.
Law Month.
Point of order, it should be Parliamentary Procedure Month.
Okay.
I didn't want to.
Obviously, this is going to continue, but should we reopen it
Yes,
again?
no,
Okay.
I think we haven't closed it
No,
yet.
we have not closed it.
Yeah,
Okay.
so-
So then let's wrap this up and then hear from whoever wants to speak. Gary.
David was making just exactly my point. At some point, we may have to consider a mooring field out here too. But I do want to be clear, we're talking about parking of dinghies here, but relative to parking of cars, there should be no parking on the grass.
Now, we haven't decided yet whether we're also going to include in this ordinance separate provisions relating to Lashley Park's day docks, or if you want to just leave that alone, but I don't.
If I may.
Yes.
We talked about that as well when I met with the chief and Officer Kennedy, and it was the consensus that we thought we should probably put a limit of no more than 4 hours at Lashley Day Dock, because there is one person that seems to be abusing the rule right now. And this person was using the Gilchrist Day Docks for full days at a time until he bent up his props and then got mad at the city. So now he goes over to Lashley every day and docks his boat, and it's a huge cruiser boat. And he's using the day dock for 8, 9, 10 hours a day, every day.
Right.
And so that is taking away from the availability of groups that are going there for lunch cruises and other things. So if a group goes there, if a boat club, for instance, goes there for a lunch cruise, typically they'll have anywhere from 10 to 15 boats in their club going and you're trying to use that day dock. And he's taking a significant amount of space on that dock every day.
Yeah, I would agree that we need to have a separate regulation for Lashley.
Yeah,
And
I
to
think
have a
4
limited
hours.
time period.
I think 4 hours would be sufficient.
3 or 4, whatever is the most
Otherwise, you
flexible.
pay
but-
for a dock at the marina.
Right.
Well, and then the question I have, and I don't have the answer because I don't have enough knowledge about this, but we do have a mooring field over at that area.
Yes, we do.
And I'm not sure, but I suspect that there are some liveaboards there as well who might want to have the same, or may have the same needs as some of the liveaboards at Gilchrist Park. So maybe we need to have a specific area where we can have permits issued for those liveaboards who use their dinghies and at the day docks at Lashley Park, or maybe that's already addressed. I don't know, Chief.
I'm before you to answer that for you. Rusty is actually very accommodating. He has set up the front portion of the walk-down dock for dinghies for anyone in the mooring field. Now, he does direct anyone that comes in for the day from a dinghy that they have to go over to the day dock. So there is a designated area, and he's actually worked very closely with Jerry with Flatmaster to make sure that there are areas for even the Flatmaster tournaments. He's very on top of where it is. The frustration where it comes from today is a specific individual, but there have been people in the past that abuse our Lashley Day Dock, leaving their vessel there for weeks on end, literally doing work right there. People that are paying for slips are calling me saying, can you do anything about it? And before, I always thought there was no overnight. It was kind of a practice to ask them to move. Now we're asking for some type of clarity.
Which I think
So-
we definitely need.
Yes.
And so, as I understand what you're saying, is that we do need to have specific regulations for overnight, and maybe limitations to that exception or a prohibition at Lashley Park as well? For
Yes.
the day docks, okay.
Yes. Now, to answer for the daytime, since I met with Councilmember Matthews, I have discussed with several people as far as during the daytime hours. And to limit someone during the daytime is really unfair because you may have boating groups, which we had one last weekend, that was from south that wanted to come and see our city. So they had 3 boats. Now, they were fairly large vessels, but they tried to move all the way down. They were here up to 6 hours. You know, they went and did shopping, and then they went and ate, and then they met with people. So to limit during the day, I'm not necessarily concerned with. It's the nighttime. That way, when you want to come in the morning, you don't see the day dock taken up.
So maybe at sundown or something like that, some kind of language that,
After meeting with the group over at Gilchrist Landing and talking with Rusty and other people, I would love to say, yeah, as soon as the sun goes down, great, but it's unfair. You have people that go out to our nightlife here, and we would not want to limit that necessarily. So the 1 to 5 a.m. gives us an ample opportunity to go check on the vessels and say, hey, you can't be here.
Is that going to take care?
Gary, go ahead.
I take a little bit of issue with Officer Kennedy from the standpoint is I've been in groups that, you know, go on cruises and so forth, and we wind up anchoring out. We have a mooring field, and typically if you have a relatively large boat, at least some of you have a dinghy, and you have the ability to come in and out, and there is, that dinghy dock could be available to them. Conversely, though I think Glenn has been spot on this issue on everything, I do think 3 hours would be a nicer. I think that 4 hours is more generous than I would like to see, because 3 hours is plenty of time to go there and have an ice cream, have a dinner, et cetera. The problem with 6 hours is, yes, you can go see our city, but you could go to the mooring field and taxi yourself in for that purpose. And if you go much beyond that, then you might be able, that you would take your boat, park it there, and go to the wine festival or something of that sort. I don't think that we would want, I would want to be available for people that want to come in and out on a regular basis. So there is a mooring field there. It can be used in the daytime. Very few that I'm aware of people that have boats of 40 foot or over are not going to have a dinghy available to them, particularly if they're in a group.
I don't have one.
Yeah, but when you're in a group, somebody does, you know that, I mean, I've been to Pelican Bay where, there'll be 30 or 40 boats of us, and out of those 30 and 40 boats, at least 80% of us have dinghies, and we're rafting up, and we're being pretty obnoxious and driving around and having a gay old time. So being able to get into land is not difficult for a group of cruisers that are coming together.
So Nancy, and then we're gonna open the public hearing.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about, if we don't limit the hours during the day, are we going to be able to address the issue of the large boat that's coming and staying for extended
No.
periods of
No.
time? And that's the issue.
The last comment is when considering, which I do appreciate it, it helps me for enforcement, is we had discussed before, regular parking citations are only $25. And one of the main comments to a couple of the individuals was, that's cheaper than not me having to pay for a slip.
Yeah.
So they were more than willing to do that. That's why when I talked to Mikhail, as far as a step program, as we do with our overnight violations, I hope you consider that as well. If it hurts your pocket a little bit, you're less likely to do it again. Thank you.
Good to know, thank you. So this is a public hearing, which is obviously still an ongoing discussion that is not gonna be resolved today. But if you would like to speak on the matter, please come to the podium over here, state your name. You have 3 minutes to give your input. Anybody wanna speak? State your name, you have 3 minutes.
Nancy Johnson, Team Punta Gorda. As a boater who just sold their boat, sadly, I know. We belong to a number of boat clubs. We've done a lot of cruising in this area. There was a time about 3 years ago where Team was engaged in some work to try to draw boaters to this community. It was an economic development initiative. It was very intentional. I think we've kind of backed off that work a little bit, not on purpose. It just sort of went by the wayside. So I applaud Lynn Matthews' efforts with the Boaters Alliance. But we were doing things like inviting boating conferences here, Seven Seas Cruising Association, and then inviting the Cape Coral Sailing Club to come and attend it. And the intention was to have boating groups in the harbor, coming ashore, spending money, going to Fisherman's Village, going downtown and eating. So I think that there's a real market for that, and I think it's a healthy thing for our community, and we should not place limitations on that would make that really difficult for folks to do. So I'd encourage you not to deal with it, but not to limit it too much, because I'd like to see us get back to that effort.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Kathy Getz, resident, Berry Street, right near Gilchrist Landing. Lynn, I applaud your efforts over there. It's changed. It was brought to your attention, and all of a sudden, 4 or 5 boats are gone.
Yeah.
They're gone. So we applaud that. We needed it. On our street, there was a guy last year who parked a work trailer there every day. He lived on a boat, and he had a trailer that was brought to the attention, and that was cleaned up. So I have mixed feelings, is what I'm telling you. The gentleman from Allegiant, the nurse who lives out there, that's their home, and they need a place to come in. The other side of the coin is, as Dave Levin talked about Sarasota and other places, Marathon comes to mind. So people say, oh my gosh, how expensive it is to moor there. There's a reason for that. And so I thank you for your efforts, but we need to temper it. That's why I like the number, try to keep that number low so that it does not get out of control and that the ordinance can be amended. So if it does get out of control, we can go back to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak? My timer is not working, so I have one on my phone here.
I'll be short. Warren Thames, liveaboard, also land resident. I also want to thank the council for the work you've done. And I agree that it looks a lot better now. There were many of us out there that had the same complaints that were voiced on shore. It's a much better facility now, and I just want to thank Lynn. I want to thank anybody and everybody on the council, Officer Kennedy, for the work you've done to help us out, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Move to close public hearing.
No, we
Well,
can't
we can't
close
do
it.
that, so,
Thank you.
So based on the discussion, Mikhail and I will put together a revised draft ordinance.
So we're bringing it back then.
That will also provide separate provisions relating to Lashley. Provide in here the opportunity for developing a resolution to deal with some of the mechanisms that don't need to be incorporated in the ordinance. And we're getting closer.
And I would also like to know what department and staff time to have that information so we can, when we're thinking about fees, that it connects back to work and structure that will have to go in because we don't have a program of that sort at this time.
Unless you suggest otherwise, I would think that the actual permits would be administered by our dock master.
Well, no,
But
not
he's,
at
yeah,
Gilchrist
there's no
Landing.
dock master there.
Well,
Is that,
they're gonna have to go somewhere.
Right.
Yes,
And
yeah,
so.
we'll figure
That's-
it out.
and
that's the
so-
problem, yeah.
And so if they're gonna have to go somewhere, they might as well go to the dock master's office. So it's all administered at one location.
they would have to get there to do that. They're
Yeah, they
anch-
would.
they're anchored.
Well, the alternative is if we're gonna issue a permit, have somebody, at Gilchrist Park?
No.
No, I'm not suggesting that.
That's why I'm saying this is a new process that we don't have established. Somebody's gonna have to take it.
Right, and that's
All
why,
right.
and, well, it's either done here at City Hall, or it's done elsewhere, and I'm just thinking if, if the dock master is identified as the person with the authority to issue the permits, we're gonna need that for Gilchrist and for Lashley anyway.
Nancy?
I didn't hear in our discussion that we were going to allow overnight parking at Lashley. It's Gilchrist that is our discussion item, and that what's wrong with them walking to City Hall and coming in here? I mean, it's not that far away.
No, there isn't, and maybe I misunderstood, but it seems like, and that's why I asked the question about, we have a mooring field over at Lashley, and whether there's anyone there now that is requiring more than, or requiring overnight parking, docking of their dinghies or not, we should anticipate that may be something that is going to be requested, particularly since we would prefer people that can get underneath the bridge to moor within our regulated mooring field. So the idea would be that we have a limited number of permits available for Lashley day docking, as well as the limited number of permits available for Gilchrist day docking, and that there be one person designated with the authority to issue those permits, and whether that be at City Hall or at Gilchrist, at Lashley Park, I don't really care, but it just seemed to me that was the natural.
Lynn?
I don't think we're talking about a huge amount of time and effort.
No, but it's new. It
I
doesn't
agree, but
exist.
is that something that the city clerk's office could administer? I mean, it's not, we're talking about maybe 5 or 6 permits maximum per quarter. Is that something where they could come in and fill out an application and they pay their money and you give them a permit? I mean, a sticker? And a list of the rules that they have to follow?
The clerk's office will do
Problem
whatever
solved.
council would like us.
They don't have to go all the way over to Lashley to get it done. I mean, I think we need to keep it simple.
We're gonna limit the number, we're gonna limit the number of permits that we're gonna hand out at Gilchrist to no more than 10. That's what I heard. We can handle this administratively. Let's not make a big deal out of that.
Okay, just we
If
need
we
to
weren't,
define
if we
who's going
weren't
to,
gonna limit it,
right,
then we'd have another
Yeah.
discussion.
okay.
And
Now-
we can put in the resolution who is going to administer the permits. That way,
Yeah,
if
we
it doesn't
will.
work, we can change it easily.
So do we need a motion to continue this public hearing to,
A date certain.
okay.
But one typo, that you, in the final whereas, it says City Council SIL in homage to Charlie Council, I'm sure, but
Thank you.
I don't remember if we have any direction on Lashley Day docks. Are we limiting it to a certain number of hours or no?
I would still like to see it be a 4-hour limit during the day and no docking overnight from 1
So
to 5.
the 1 to 5, okay, so maybe we could just put in another sentence that says at Lashley Day Docks, a 4-hour limit.
I prefer 3.
I think 4 is
I mean,
I think 4 is reasonable.
fine.
if that's what the Punta Gorda Boaters Alliance is recommending, then I'm willing to go with that, although the citizen discussion that I had was 3, but I'm willing to go with the Punta Gorda Boaters Alliance recommendation.
I'm fine with
I
4.
won't make that big a deal of it.
Yeah.
So now we have direction.
Now you're splitting
Well,
hairs.
And the,
Just so that we are clear on this, are we in fact going to allow for the issuance of permits on a limited basis for Lashley Park dinghies so that people can stay overnight?
I did not hear that.
I think from what we heard, and I don't want to get any legal mud with you, muddy water, but that we're managed over there. We have a dock master, we're managed, he's managing it, he's making it fair and work for everybody. So the less we can do over there besides this time limit, the better. At Gilchrist, there's nobody watching over the place. So I feel comfortable with Lashley, and if we find out we need it, then we
Yeah, we can always
put it in
revisit.
there.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, that's fine.
Okay, so we
I
need
would
a
agree.
motion to continue this to the next meeting, or do you want to?
Did we close the public hearing?
No, we did not. We're making,
No.
we need a motion to continue to a date certain, so
all right, I'll
somebody
make a
just has
motion
to.
to continue to the next meeting, or if you can get this done
You
by
want
then.
till the,
Yeah, we're good.
okay.
Okay.
So we have a motion to continue it to April 18th.
Second.
Motion is second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Opposed? Okay, carried unanimously.
No, Lynn saw me aye.
Okay.
I
All
know where
right,
you
that
live.
didn't take long at all. So the next one probably shouldn't either, but the next is a quasi judicial public hearing, which is an appeal of a special permit. And I do have a voting conflict. My husband is the company doing the work, so I will recuse myself and I will let's call a 5-minute break. And then Gary the vice mayor will take over the proceedings for CCSP 01-18. Okay.
Oh, I'm looking for you.
Yeah, I'm right here. Okay, we're reconvening the council meeting April 4th, 2018. We're going to continue on with a quasi-judicial public hearing for CCSP-01-18 appeal.
Yes, this is a quasi-judicial proceeding, so anyone who is planning to present any evidence or testimony on this matter, please rise to be sworn by the city clerk at this time.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in today's proceedings?
I do.
When you're ready to speak, please come to the podium, state your name, and indicate that you've been sworn.
This is CCSP-01-18, an appeal of the Punta Gorda Isles Canal Advisory Committee's January 16, 2018 denial of a petition for special permit pursuant to Section 6-6J Punta Gorda Code to install a boat lift with one piling outside the 45-degree angle, which is prohibited by Section 6-6C4 Punta Gorda Code, and to install a second boat lift, a portion of which is also outside the 45-degree angle at a property with less than 85 feet of seawall, as prohibited by Section 6-6C3 and 6-6C4 Punta Gorda Code at Lot 8, Block 51, Section 6, also known as 2608 Rio Plato Drive, Punta Gorda, Florida, 33950. The owner petitioner is Kevin Whitcamp, and I would note that this, the ultimate decision is going to be taken into consideration the criteria in Section 6-6J4, which consists of items A, B, C, D, E, and F, which is the criteria for granting a special permit.
Good morning, again for the record, Mikhail Finkel. As the city attorney said, this is an appeal of a special permit that was heard by the Punta Gorda Isles Canal Maintenance Committee. Staff would like to enter into the record the January 9th, 2018 staff report issued by the Public Works Engineering Department. As a summary, this request was required a special permit for 3 reasons. There is an existing boat lift on the property that is proposed to be relocated. That would cause a portion of it to be located outside the 45 degree. The request is for a second lift to be used for a personal watercraft. That in itself requires a special permit, and then a portion of that watercraft lift will also be outside the 45 degree. So there were 3 issues. As I said, the PGI Canal considered it at a public hearing, and the request was denied 5-1. The applicant is now appealing that decision to City Council, and Mr. Jake Dye from Kiesling Engineering is here to present the request to council.
And as he comes up, let me point out that in this appeal, the burden is upon the petitioner to establish entitlement to the requested special permit, demonstrating through competent substantial evidence satisfaction of the items A through F that I previously mentioned.
Good morning. My name is Jake Dye. I'm with Kiesling Construction, and I represent Mr. Kevin Whitcamp, who's the owner of the property that we'll be talking about today. And for the record, I'm also a member of the Punta Gorda Isles Canal Maintenance Advisory Committee.
Have you been sworn, sir?
Say again?
Have you been sworn?
Yes, and I have been sworn.
Okay.
Thanks. Number 1, please. Okay, good, thanks. I put this up here to show you the situation that exists in the property from the beginning. If you notice, the property has a dock and has a boat lift, and there's a boat that's on the dock right now. And with some luck, and I'm sorry, city council members, there you go. And you see that, and that's the boat lift and the boat that we're going to be talking about today. And so you can see, and if you go to the next number 2, this overlay, or this handout shows the arrows show where the pilings are for the boat lift, and you can see where the front of the boat is with the red line. And the shaded red spot is a sailboat that the property owner also had. He had a power boat, it was on the lift, and you can see the way it's facing right now, front towards the right. He brought his sailboat to the property, and when he did that, the orientation of the power boat makes it very difficult and dangerous for him to try and get the boat on and off the lift. And so to get the boat on and off the lift, he has to turn it around the other way, and if you're familiar with most boats, 2/3 of the boat has to sit forward of the center line of the lift. So the boat is always going to hang out the front of the lift as opposed to the back. So as it sits on the lift right now, it's not a problem, except they can't get, it can't use the lift for the boat, can't get on and off of it safely. And so the owner wants to move the lift, and if you go to number 3, this handout shows the boat facing the other direction. And by the way, we've turned that boat around, so it now, the front end faces to the left. And the problem that arises there is by the time you get his 37-foot, 38 feet overall sailboat in there, the power boat sticks out too much off the front. There's not enough room. And if you move the boat back to the rear, it becomes dangerously overweight on the back of the lift itself. And so the top drawing that you see is the way it exists right now. And if you look at that yellow X that goes through the boat, that's the center of the lift. And if you look at the black X is the center of balance for the boat. So you can see how it's skewed towards to the rear. and that lift is not, doesn't have the capacity to be off balance like that. And the request that was submitted to the Canal Advisory Committee was to move the lift back to the location that you can see in the bottom drawing. And by doing that, it allows the boat to sit more balanced on the lift. And the thing that you notice is there's not a lot of difference in where the boat is. The boat sits about 4 feet farther to the right when it's, if you want to put that on, you can put that on there too. That shows how the boat has to sit on a lift, and you don't have to be much of a boater to understand that the way the balance is, that's a pretty dangerous situation. So we wanted to move the boat farther back. So if you would go to 4, please. So these are 2 drawings, and the top drawing is the way the lift and the boat, the red line, the long red lines in the center is that represents the boat itself. You can see where that boat is sitting. We want to move the lift farther to the right. That allows the boat with the green line to sit balanced on the lift and provide enough room to allow the sailboat to be on the front at the same time and not be across the what we call the boat limitation line. And I'm just going to deal with the large lift right now, and then I'll come back to the personal watercraft lift after that. If you go to the number 5, before you do that though, if you go back to that previous one, you notice the difference between the 2 boats up there, and there's a 3, and that's 3 feet difference from where the boat sits on the lift currently and where the boat would sit before. And when we talk about impediments to navigation, you have to look at the whole mass, and in this particular case, the boat is what's sticking out, and that would be interference to somebody, and we're talking about 3 feet additional, and it's all within the boat limitation line or within an extension of the owner's property. Okay, go to 5, please. And this is the one that you saw before. It also shows the same thing in how it sits. None of the lift and none of the boat would go across the boat limitation line, and for simplicity, in this case, because we have normal property boundaries, you can look at that as kind of an extension of the property line itself. So if you go to number 6, there is a precedent for this kind of, for an approval of a special permit for this. This was a special permit that was approved unanimously by the Canal Advisory Committee in June of last year. And if you notice that boat lift, it's oriented different, but that boat lift is 9 feet from the property boundary, and that's a permanent structure. It's there all the time. So it was approved unanimously by the Canal Advisory Committee itself. So the owner has requested that he be allowed to move the boat to facilitate or move the lift to facilitate having his boat on the lift and balanced in a safe manner. That takes one of the pilings outside the 45. Again, that's not an unusual request, and it is in violation of the code, which I might add, the code that we have written in the city is good. It works really well. And in fact, the county has taken a look at the way we have written the code, and they're adapting the 45 rule and a couple things like that. So the code works good. And when we have examples where we need an exception, we have the special permit that allows us to do that. So the system we have in place is a good system, and it works for us quite well. So The personal watercraft, if we go back to number 5, the PETA, I mean, this is drawn, when it was drawn with the dimensions that I actually gave the city. And as we learn more about this lift, which we had never put one in before, it's not quite as long as we have indicated there. So some of the bunk system, of a small portion of the bunk system, would be outside the 45. We could cut that bunk off and keep it within the 45, but that doesn't really make any difference, because when the boat's sitting on the lift itself, the personal watercraft, that's the thing that is that's there. That's the mass that's sitting there. So it does go across the 45, only a small amount, but the personal watercraft would consume all that area and quite a bit more. At no time do any of these craft go across the boat limitation line. So I also would add that when this went before the Canal Advisory Committee, we worked with the staff, and generally, if we're going to do something and it looks like it's going to need a special permit, I kind of talk to the staff and get ideas of what has been done in the past and what's going to be unacceptable. And the staff for this recommended favorable consideration to the Canal Advisory Committee. So I'll answer any questions that you have. I also point out too that personal watercraft, the PWC lift, requires a special permit just because it's a second lift. But there's also precedent for that. We've approved a number of additional floating lifts, as they're called. They're not docks, they're floating lifts. And personal watercraft, we've approved davit systems and things like that. So that's not an unusual request. That's in the berm area, has absolutely no impact on navigation or anything else. It wouldn't impact anybody else. So just, it was pointed out that we have to deal with the 6-6H5, which is, what's the criteria for the approval of a special permit. It would not be injurious to the waterway involved, in which it's not. It doesn't have any adverse impact on that. Does not have any impact on safe navigation. It's within the well within 25 feet of a 100-foot canal system. It's not, it conforms to all the other types of structures that we have in the canal. Both of the lifts are consistent with other lifts that are out there, and the manner in which the boats are stored on the lift is consistent with how we store boats on lifts throughout the community. It's not going to have a detrimental impact to the peaceful use and enjoyment of anybody, any of the neighbors around, and it certainly is not going to have be a detriment to public health, welfare, or safety. So I would entertain your questions.
I have some questions for staff. Mikhail, or whoever wants to answer this, have we been able to, first of all, let me just disclose that I met with Mr. Dye the other day and walked the property and got an assessment of what we're dealing with here. And my understanding is that we were not able to contact the owner that would be to the right of this property, that's the vacant property, is that correct?
We did not contact them other than through the direct mailing that we do as part of our due diligence and notification of any kind of public hearing.
So we have not communicated with that owner to get his blessing on this. That's my point.
And we also tried to contact him and got no response as well.
Because I'm concerned, I had a conversation on Monday afternoon with some former members of the Canal Advisory Committee, and while I appreciate your position and trying to work on behalf of your client, one can argue that you you see that precedents may have been set in previous situations, but every situation that's ever been voted on has specific circumstances that either lean people one way or the other when they vote on something like this. And my concern is that the vacant property next door doesn't even have a dock on it right now. And when somebody goes to develop that property, whether it's the current owner or a future owner, they may not be okay with this. And if we don't have at least current blessing on what's being proposed here, we may have a problem with the new owner when they go to put a dock and/or a boat on that space. And it's not exceptionally wide. It's a standard 100-foot wide canal. And if the new owner comes in with a boat that's 40 or 50 feet, they may have a difficult time getting in and out of that space. So I have a very big concern about this.
Well, just if I can comment on that, the owner is by code allowed to take his boats. If you took the lift out completely, just totally disregard that lift, and put those boats there, it has the same impact. It's the same mass that's there as would be if the lift isn't present. And the person next door has absolutely no say over that. The property owner is allowed to moor his boats within the what we call the boat limitation line, which is the same as, in this case, as a property boundary. So it doesn't have, he wouldn't have any say then if there was no lift. It's only because there is a lift and it's outside the 45 that he may be able to comment on it. And the mass of the boat is going to be the same regardless. He could move it farther over if he wanted to do that. And the other thing is the mass of the boat only, which is the thing that's going to be in the way, changes 3 feet. It's only going to be 3 feet further to the right than it is right now. Even though the lift changes, the boat mass only changes 3 feet.
I understand that. However, I would say, on the other side of that fence, we have vacant docks on both sides of my house. And when we come in and it's windy, and we had a rental person renting the house next door, and they had a 45-foot Sea Ray Express cruiser. And when that boat was on the dock next door, it was way more difficult for us to spin the boat around and get it to our dock than it is when there's no boat there. And I'm a little bit concerned about this because there is going to be a definite difference in the way a person has to come in and approach their dock when all of that space, that basically you're talking about an entire square amount of space that's going to be occupied by boats and toys. And God bless him, he's got the money to have all those toys. He's got a lot of toys, and that's his privilege. But what I don't like is the fact that I think this is a situation where he's got more toys than he has space for, and it concerns me a great deal.
Well, the reality is he could fill that space up with his boats completely and be totally legal, and we wouldn't have no say over that.
Can the boat lift be kept in the current location and make the capability of it larger, weight-wise?
You could do that. The issue still is with the balance of the boat, and because you have so much of the mass of the boat hanging out the back, even though the capacity of the lift would support that boat, the balance would make it difficult. If he goes all the way out in the back of the boat to service his engines, which he would have to do because they're outboard engines, then he throws all that extra weight in the back, and you get into a teetering situation. Yeah, we could put in a larger lift. There's no doubt about that. And that comment was made, well, you could probably do something to keep it in the 45. You really can't. Not in a practical manner. So it wouldn't be safe to just increase the size of the lift, although, I mean, that's a possibility.
So it could be done.
Oh, yeah, I mean, in terms of the capacity, it definitely can be done. It's just that doesn't change. You can make that lift, 20,000-pound lift if you wanted to do it, but that's not going to change where the center of balance is and the safe storing that boat on, you know, in the footprint of that lift. But yeah, we can make it so it'll lift it. That's not a problem. I can lift anything.
I mean, judging from what I saw the other day, I'm a little concerned about the look of the lift right now from the wear and tear on the weight of that watercraft on that lift. It looks like it's very, very out of balance. I agree with that part of it. And it certainly is putting a very, very heavy stress load on the boat lift cables right now.
Yeah, it's an old lift too. Something's gonna
Yeah.
give, but,
Nancy?
Yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't have a chance to.
you know, it was a late thought,
Out
so.
there, yeah, my schedule just didn't allow. But I've been pondering this as I've been reading all over this, and it's with a lot that's 80 feet wide. And when we purchased our property, I know when we were looking for a home, and we saw many beautiful homes, but we wanted to have a property that had ample seawall, because we didn't know what we were going to purchase in the way of a boat. It seems like we know what we're getting into when we buy the property. We should anyway. So now we have an owner that has lots of wonderful toys and vessels that are great, but they're exceeding what this property can provide. And it's almost as if, you know, as I read through this, it's like it's the wrong property for what this owner wants to do.
Well, there's no doubt that this has been a challenge from the very beginning. And as a marine contractor, I don't believe I'm in a position to tell him what he can have on his property and what he can't. And maybe you can do that. But as a marine contractor, I'm not going to tell him that, I think you have too many toys. So I think that's inappropriate for me. Maybe somebody else can. But if he didn't have a boat lift and he just stored that both of those craft in the water in their current location, actually moved them to the property boundary, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because he can do that legally. He has the obligation to store his boats in that space from side to side. And I'm assuming that legally the adjacent owner has no legal dedicated use of the space across his property boundary. So in other words, the neighbor on the right doesn't have a legal obligation to be able to use that space, or prevent him, the property owner, from using the space, except by code it says you can't have any structure over there, but it doesn't say anything about the boat. So that boat owner, Mr. Whitcamp, could fill that whole seawall up, and now it's going to make it hard on himself when he does that. And you know, I'm the first one to admit that the more things you have out there, you know, the more things are going to start, you know, competing with each other. But if we look around the canal system right now, our houses are being renovated. They're being torn down. We're getting bigger houses. We're getting bigger boats. We're getting more boats. We tell everybody, come to Punta Gorda to live, play, and work in paradise. And they're coming, and they're bringing all their stuff with them when they do that. So for the most part, we don't run into these conflicts. But every once in a while, we do, and then we use a special permit to process to handle it. And if that doesn't work, then we bring it to appeal.
But I look at this and I see the 45-degree rule,
Right.
and it's there for a reason. I mean,
Pardon me?
It's there for a reason.
Right.
And that's why I feel like I'm looking at this and that's where I'm struggling with this. And
Yeah.
I understand what you're suggesting, but it's,
Well, we approve on the average of 3 in the Punta Gorda, and I'm not positive about BSI because I don't go to as many of those, but in Punta Gorda, we approve 2 to 3 special permits outside the 45 every month at every meeting. And in the committee, I mean, that's, you know, the problem is we long ago created boundaries that don't always facilitate the things that we want to do.
Jaha.
I mean, I think in regard to actual safety, that this 3-foot allowance is really not an issue. I think that, I mean, one, it allows the person to use their property the way they'd like to, but also I think it just is in the best interest of them to be able to balance their boat out properly. I think that in doing this, we would be causing unreasonable stress on the person. I think it'd be very reasonable if we allow this exception. I mean, you're talking about 3 feet, and
Big difference when you're boating.
no, 3 feet when it comes to the center of gravity of your boat capsizing because your lifts can't hold it, I think is a big deal.
So we've approved special permits for permanent structure outside, I mean, much closer to the boat limitation line than this as well.
Okay. Any other questions from us? Okay, do we have any, thank you, Jake. Do we have any public comments that please get in the line? And you have 3 minutes. Okay.
If there is anyone else who has come in or decided since this hearing began that wishes to provide evidence or testimony and hasn't been sworn, please rise to be sworn by the city clerk at this time.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in today's proceedings? I do. Thank you.
Okay. Come forward. Come up, please state your name, and that you've been sworn, and